Welcome, Merry Christmas, everyone. This is the last video of our Christmas campaign because it is Christmas. And we have one final story, all of you. It is the Nutcracker, the woke Nutcracker. And this one, I don't have my own art, so I just stole it from the internet. Um, yeah, it was from some Nutcracker movie. And so let's get into it. Once, many Christmas Eves ago, Claire's parents throwing a party for their many friends and relatives. Were throwing a party for their many friends and relatives. These festive gatherings were an annual event in Claire's household, a singular opportunity during the year for everyone to forget their cares, to dance and gossip, and to eat as many fatty and sugary foods as possible. Claire's parents felt it best to get such impulses out of one system on a regular basis. For the children, the chef would always bake a large gingerbread castle, wonderfully decorated with scores of marzipan peasants and serfs scaling the walls and overthrowing the parasitical king and his family. These parties were always a joy for Clara and her brother Fritz, because they meant presents, especially presents from their Uncle Drosselmeyer. Their uncle was a mysterious, out of the mainstream sort of chap, whose alternative lifestyle, if indeed he even had a lifestyle, was the subject of much speculation. He was gaunt of face and wore a gargantuan powdered wig and a patch over one eye. Mostly for effect, said Claire's father. He was predisposed he is predisposed dramatic gestures and exotic, ostentatious clothing, anything to shake up people's bourgeois complacency. But Claire and Fritz loved their charismatic relative, both for his independent attitude and for the marvelously intricate mechanical toys he built for them. On this Christmas Eve, their uncle arrived later than usual, but the delay merely heightened the excitement of his arrival. It wasn't until after the guest had forced himself on dinner that he finally appeared in the main hall with a sack over his shoulder. Clara, Fritz, and the other children could barely contain their delight, and nearly knocked Uncle Drosselmeyer down to see what he'd brought this year. Their uncle snickered cryptically, then reached into his bag with a great flourish. The adults as well as the pre-adults gathered around him in curiosity. The man of augmented eccentricity smiled at all the attention and pulled over a silver top, decorated with intriguing symbols. To make to give holiday gift giving more inclusive and outreaching, he said in a quavery voice, I have developed this, the world's first automatic dreidel. He, s- he set this marvel on the tabletop, where it began to spin on its own power, glittering and gleaming and whirring. When it finally began to slow down and fell on its side, it made a strange clinking sound, then spit coins out of a small slit near its handle. Everyone gasped and clapped their hands at this mechanical wonder, except for a few spoil sports who complained that their children were forgetting how to entertain themselves with all these new automatic playthings. Next from his satchel, Uncle Drosselmeyer pulled out a doll, which looked ordinary enough after the spectacular dreidel. He smirked at everyone's apparel and disappointment, then turned a knob in the doll's back. Mamma, said the doll in a natural sounding voice, or Papa, whichever caregiver is available. The crowd thought this was quite ingenious and also socially progressive. He presented the doll to his niece, who handled it gingerly. Then, from the bag, he pulled out the final gift, a hand-carved nutcracker, dressed as a soldier and wearing the most comical expression. He handed this little figure to Fritz. Oh, was there a hue and cry at this? It was bad enough to reinforce gender roles by handing Clara the doll, but on top of that, to give young, impressionable Fritz such an obvious symbol of castration and emasculation was inexcusable. People grew so angry that Uncle Drosselmeyer feared he would be forcibly ejected from the party. I intend no harm, he protested sincerely. I meant for the children to share the toys equally. He then swapped the doll and the nutcracker between Claire and Fritz. Years later, this incident, among others, would come back to Fritz while he underwent repressed memory therapy, much to the chagrin and legal entanglement of his well-meaning uncle. Clara liked the Nutcracker and played with it for the rest of the evening. The guests ate and drank long into the night, giving not a thought to the purging and colonic irrigation that would be necessary the next morning. After they had all left, Clara's father tried to persuade her it was time for bed. Please, may I stay up a while longer? She asked. The Nutcracker is telling me stories about why he left the military. Her father smiled wearily and walked upstairs. Some time later, Claire set the Nutcracker on the cupboard shelf, just as the clock struck midnight. As the final chime rang, very strange things began to happen in the room. Through the floor and out the baseboards came a crowd of squeaking, scurrying mice, hundreds of mice, an entire army of mice, and in their midst stood their leader, a multi-craniumed mouse king who wore a golden crown on each of his 7 heads. This is our image that I picked that will not scar you for life for this particular moment. Claire was marveling at this when she heard the toys in the cupboard begin to stir and shout. Oh, help! They cried. The Mouse King and his expansionist forces have returned. Oh, save us, Nutcracker! Lead us into battle! To Clara's utter amazement, her little friend, the Nutcracker, walked forward and addressed them all. Good citizens, think for a minute. Do you really want to perpetuate the old great man myth of history/herstory? Important actions arise from the will of the people, not from megalomania of any one individual. The toys admitted that their first impulse had been a tad servile and reactionary. They found a committee to examine possible action plans to counter the Mouse King's advances. Then they then appointed the Nutcracker to head a fact-finding and cultural interchange team to develop a dialogue with the mice. The fact-finding team headed out and returned 20 minutes later, tattered and bloody. The toys then voted to assemble a crisis intervention team, again with the Nutcracker at the helm. This team headed out and returned 15 minutes later, in even worse shape than the first. It seemed their non-aggressive options were dwindling. After much debate, the toys agreed on their final course of action. They would send out a team of mediators to negotiate a peaceful settlement to the current crisis. Despite his now tattered appearance, the Nutcracker was again chosen to lead the delegation. With the blessing and hopes of the other toys and Clara, the team went forward. 20 minutes passed with no word, then an hour, then 90 minutes. Finally, after 2 anxious hours, the mediators returned with joyful news. We have an agreement with the Mouse King, announced the Nutcracker. If we help them liberate food from the pantry regularly, they will retreat from the territory they currently occupy. The toys let out a cheer and hailed the mediation team for their wisdom and hard work. The Nutcracker walked over to Clara, who had stayed to lend her support to the beleaguered toys. The Mouse King wasn't nearly so dangerous and irrational as he seemed, explained the wooden individual. I finally deduced from his 7 headed appearance that he might be suffering from some sort of multi-personality disorder, which which made him delusional and paranoid. Once I made contact with the most rational and judicious of his personalities, we easily reached an accord. Bravo, said Clara. Your dedication is to be praised. Mice certainly have been feared and marginalized for much too long. The Nutcracker made a mannerly bow. And now, sweet Clara, I would like to take you on a journey to my own kingdom, through the Christmas wood and the glade of the sugar plum fairies, to the capital of Toyland, the wondrous candy town. Clara was surprised by his offer. "I- I'm sorry," she stammered, "but no." The Nutcracker was crestfallen, and his larger than average jaw dropped to his chest. You see, we've been discussing just this sort of idea in our storybook woman's study group, explained Clara. We object that it's always the young women who are forced to undertake these disruptive journeys. The obvious implication is that we are docile, helpless, and easily manipulated, and that our backgrounds and identities are of lesser importance. And even you should be able to see how such a journey is symbolic of the violent abduction that occurs on the wedding night. So, in memory of Dorothy and of Alice, poor Alice, she's never regained her grip on reality, you know. I have to decline. The Nutcracker felt a bit foolish after this, unaware of the symbolism of his invitation. He certainly had intended no disrespect. He excused himself in the most courteous manner and gathered all the toys together in the cupboard. The last thing Clara remembered before waking up was the Nutcracker's courtly bow which she accepted with the graciousness with which it was offered. The next morning, Claire found herself curled up on the floor of the drawing room, next to the cupboard. Inside, she could see all the toys in their usual places, and in the middle of them all, the Nutcracker, immobile, steadfast, and still smiling. What a wonderful, peace-loving dream, she said to herself, yet not so much a dream as an attainable reality. Clara stretched and rose from the carpet. As she looked around the room in the early morning light, her happiness was tempered by a pitiful scene. On the table in the dining room sat the ruins of the gingerbread castle, which had been sacked and destroyed by mice while she dreamt during the night. Merry Christmas to everybody. I hope you enjoyed our woke Christmas stories. That is all we have for you. Good night.